There are people who have changed the world, and there are people whose names we simply don't remember. So here is the question: what if the most brilliant mind of the 20th century was on the verge of becoming one of the latter? Because this man was not only rejected by two prestigious Swiss schools, but he was also considered mediocre at best by his teachers. He would fail his entrance exam for university and be told that he had no original thought. This would all lead him to the brink of giving up. That is until his late 20s, when he suddenly developed the theory of relativity, which would go on to make him famous around the world. But how did he do it? Well, join us today in this new series where we tell the incredible stories behind history's most influential people. And this is the story of Albert Einstein. From the age of 2, Albert knew one thing: he wanted to understand how things worked. When he saw a moving train, he wasn't impressed by its size or power, but he wondered how it could move so many people. From then on, he would regularly take apart clocks and other devices that he found just so that he could see what they were made of. Unfortunately, this was not something that was encouraged at home. His father would often say, "Why do you need to know how things work when you already know perfectly well how to use them?" It didn't help that Albert was a very slow learner too. At first, he didn't speak until he was almost 4 years old, and he continued to struggle throughout his primary education. It wasn't until he went to high school that things started to change, because now he had access to books that could teach him things on his own. For example, he read about Euclid's geometry and became obsessed with one of the book's theorems. You see, when Albert learned that someone had managed to prove something so beautiful through pure reasoning, he felt inspired to become a mathematician himself. However, this did not impress his teachers at all, who were used to students just memorizing things. In fact, they would tell him that he was far too lazy and that he was never going to amount to anything. And it got even worse when he went to college, because now he had professors who actually believed their own titles. For example, at the Zurich Polytechnic, Albert tried to enroll as a physics student, but he was told that he wouldn't get in unless he took an entrance exam. Now, not wanting to disappoint his mother, he would study night and day in order to pass. But lo and behold, he ended up failing the exam by a single point. They said that his math and physics scores were good, but that his chemistry was terrible. His professor would later say, "The boy has no originality, imagination, or power of abstract thought. He sees no beauties in our study." As you can imagine, this was quite disheartening, especially after he had worked so hard for this. But little did he know that these next few years were going to be his most productive. When he graduated, he was unable to find a teaching position. So in order to survive, he took a job at a patent office near his home. But despite being surrounded by inventions every day, he was bored out of his mind. In fact, he despised the work so much that he would spend all day dreaming instead. And that's when the light bulb moment happened. First, he came up with the idea of special relativity, which stated that the laws of physics are the same for all observers in uniform motion. Then he came up with the idea of general relativity, which described gravity as the curvature of spacetime caused by mass and energy. To say that this was a big deal would be a massive understatement. Not only did it revolutionize our understanding of the universe, but it also led to some of the most important technologies of the 20th century. For example, GPS satellites rely on Einstein's theories to function, because otherwise they would drift off course by several kilometers. Moreover, it is said that Stephen Hawking only became interested in physics because of Einstein. Of course, such groundbreaking discoveries didn't come out of nowhere. Instead, they were the result of Albert thinking deeply about the universe and the laws that govern it. In fact, this is why he would often be seen walking around the streets, since that's when his most creative ideas would come to him. But unfortunately, his friends would often join him on these walks and break the mood. With all of that said, though, Albert's colleagues noticed that he was often absent-minded and more focused on his thoughts than his work. So once again, he was on the verge of losing his job. That is until he submitted a paper on his new theories, which finally earned him some recognition. But even then, the scientific community was split over whether he was right or wrong. Eventually, though, experiments started to confirm his predictions and Albert won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. This meant that he was invited to speak at some of the most prestigious universities in the world. He began traveling back and forth between America and Europe, sharing his knowledge with everyone that would listen. At the time, this was his dream job because not only did he get to travel, but he also got to speak about something that he loved. Plus, he was able to live a relatively quiet life away from the media. That all changed, however, when World War II broke out. While other scientists were busy developing the atomic bomb, Albert was telling everyone that he opposed the use of nuclear weapons. In fact, he was so outspoken that he called for an immediate ceasefire and spoke out against conscription. It didn't help that he was Jewish either, since this meant that both Germany and Italy viewed him as an enemy. Therefore, in 1933, he decided to leave Europe for good and settle down in the United States. As you might expect, this was incredibly sad for him since not only was he leaving everything he had ever known behind, but he was also leaving behind his friends and family. And it got even worse in 1935 when his son died. But even then, he remained strong. In fact, he would go on to become an American citizen in 1940. And continue doing what he did best, speaking out against war and developing new theories about the universe. However, with the end of World War II, things started to change once again because now everyone was wondering how to stop another war from happening. It was at this time that Albert became involved in politics. For example, he signed a letter asking Congress not to fund the research of atomic weapons and campaigned for President Truman to veto the use of nuclear energy. Sadly, however, he was unsuccessful because soon enough, the Cold War broke out and politicians started competing over who could develop the most powerful weapon. Because of this, Albert became more concerned than ever before and would say, "I know not much of the politics of the future, but I am certain there will be no lasting peace among nations until we establish a world government." He was then offered the chance to be the director of research at the Institute for Advanced Study, where he could focus on theoretical physics. And so he accepted, which would be the place that he would spend the rest of his career. While there, he came up with his theory of a unified field, which aimed to explain how gravity and electromagnetism interact. Sadly, however, he never finished the project. Instead, he spent his last days writing popular science articles and giving lectures to anyone that would listen. He died in 1955 at the age of 76. And although he is no longer with us, his work continues to inspire scientists and thinkers all over the world. So the moral of the story is that Albert Einstein was a man who dared to think differently. Although he was rejected by many people throughout his early life, he never gave up on his dreams. Instead, he proved them all wrong by becoming one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then stay tuned for more content. And until next time.